Sardis, Kingdom of Lydia, somewhere around 650 BC. A metalworker sits hunched over a small stone anvil. In his tongs, a lump of pale metal, half gold, half silver, the color of weak morning light. He's already weighed it 3 times against a set of stone weights worn smooth from decades of other men's hands before his. He can't afford a 4th check. The kiln behind him is still hot, and the king's officials don't pay men to be slow. He sets the lump between 2 carved dies, raises the hammer, brings it down once, hard. A lion appears in the metal, teeth bared, mane raised, the mark of the Lydian crown burned into the alloy forever. He sets it aside to cool. He has no idea what he's just done. He thinks he's made a payment. He's actually just made every scale in the ancient world obsolete, made every merchant who bites a coin to test it obsolete, made 6,000 years of arguing over sacks of grain and chunks of jewelry obsolete, all in one hammer strike, in a back room in a small kingdom most people alive today couldn't point to on a map. And somewhere across the water, in 100 crowded market stalls where people are still literally cutting rings apart to buy bread, nobody has heard of this yet. They will. And when they do, nothing about how humans trade with each other will ever look the same again. Humans farmed, they built cities, they invented writing, they ran empires that lasted centuries, they built the actual pyramids, stone by stone, generation by generation, and not one single coin changed hands to make any of it happen. So if there's no money for most of civilization's existence, how does an economy even function? How do you pay a soldier, tax a farmer, or buy bread from a stranger in a world where the very idea of a price hasn't been invented yet? That question sat unanswered for 6,000 years. 6,000 years of increasingly desperate improvisation, each fix solving one problem and immediately cracking open a new one. Before a metalworker in a small kingdom finally found the answer everyone else had missed. Sometime between 9,000 and 7,000 BC, in the Fertile Crescent, the Ice Age finally loosened its grip. People who'd spent generations chasing herds and foraging for roots started doing something new, staying put, farming, building permanent settlements instead of moving with the seasons. And the moment you start farming instead of foraging, something strange happens. You start producing more than you can eat. Grain piles up, livestock multiplies faster than any one family can use. Pottery and tools accumulate past what a household actually needs. That surplus does something to a community. It lets people specialize. One family raises sheep full-time. Another spends its days shaping clay into pots. A third gets good enough at chipping stone tools that they stop bothering to grow their own wheat at all. Which sounds like progress. It is progress. But it creates an immediate practical problem. If I make pottery and you raise sheep, and I want one of your sheep, we now have to agree, right there on the spot, what a sheep is worth in pots. And there's no answer written down anywhere. There's no price list. There's just 2 people staring at each other, negotiating from scratch every single time. That negotiation had a name eventually. Economists call it barter, and it ran on one brutal bottleneck, the double coincidence of wants. Say you need grain. I've got grain, plenty of it, but I don't want your pottery. I want a goat. So now you're not just trading with me. You need to go find someone else, someone with a goat who happens to want pottery, make that trade first, and then come back to me. 2 negotiations just for 1 sack of grain, and either one can fall apart over something as small as timing, or mood, or one person deciding they'd rather wait for a better offer. Not that barter never worked. Obsidian and shells and rare stones moved hundreds of kilometers along ancient trade routes, even at this early stage, so clearly people were determined to make exchange happen, standardized system or not. But barter didn't scale. Every transaction was a one-off. Every deal had to be rebuilt from nothing. Money wasn't invented because anybody got rich. It was invented because barter got unbearable. Civilization outgrew its own first payment system before it had any replacement lined up. But barter wasn't even the only system running at the time. There was something else entirely, something that looked more like a small town where everybody just remembered who owed who. Neolithic village somewhere around 8,000 to 6,000 BC. No coins, no scales, no barter negotiations over every jug of oil. Instead, a gift economy. Families share food, labor, livestock, tools with their neighbors, not for an immediate payment, but on the quiet understanding that the favor comes back around eventually. Give generously today and you gain standing in the community. Refuse to share, and everyone remembers that too. The currency here isn't metal. It's reputation. Debts aren't written anywhere because there's no writing yet either. They live in memory, in the shared social ledger of a village small enough that everybody genuinely knows everybody. When a bad harvest hits, the village leaders redistribute what's left. When an irrigation ditch needs digging, they organize the labor. The whole system runs on trust instead of contracts. It actually works, as long as the village stays small enough for that trust to hold. So what happens the moment it doesn't stay small enough? Villages grow. Strangers start passing through. Traveling merchants show up who nobody's grandmother remembers owing a favor to. And the entire system that depended on everyone knowing everyone starts to buckle the instant people stop knowing everyone. You can't run a social shared ledger in your head once the population outgrows your memory. Somebody has to start writing this down, except nobody's invented writing yet either. So Mesopotamia tried something else. Somewhere between roughly 8,000 and 3,500 BC, temple administrators facing a population that kept growing and a job that kept getting more complicated started making small clay tokens. A cone-shaped token meant one measure of grain. A different shape meant a sheep. Another meant a jar of oil. These weren't money, they were bookkeeping. A merchant didn't need to physically inspect a shipment of grain anymore. He could count tokens and verify the obligation right there on the spot. Thousands of these tokens have been pulled out of the ground across the Near East, and the detail that stops archaeologists in their tracks is the consistency. This wasn't one temple's private system. It was standardized, understood the same way across huge distances, long before anyone had invented a single written word, which means humanity figured out how to count wealth before it figured out how to write words. Somewhere in a dusty temple storeroom, someone had already made the first real conceptual leap toward money. The idea that a small physical object could represent value instead of being the value itself. That leap didn't sit still for long. Between about 3,700 and 3,300 BC, officials ran into a new problem: tampering. A pile of loose clay tokens is only useful record if nobody can quietly slip one in or pull one out. So they started sealing tokens inside hollow clay envelopes, boule, pressing impressions of the tokens on the outer shell so an inspector could tell what was inside without cracking it open. A cylinder seal, unique to its owner, worked like a signature. Any attempt to tamper with a sealed bulla left obvious damage. And then somebody in a Mesopotamian back room made the connection that changes everything that comes after it. If the outside of the bulla already shows what's inside, why do you need the tokens at all? Just press the symbol straight onto a flat tablet of wet clay and skip the envelope entirely. That shortcut is now understood as a direct ancestor of cuneiform writing. The written word, arguably the single most consequential technology humans ever built, may trace its lineage not to poetry, not to prayer, not to any sacred text, but to a receipt. Economic record-keeping, not literature, might be the actual reason humanity learned to write. And the story is only getting started, because those same temples were about to become something nobody expected either. Between 3,500 and 2,500 BC, the great temples of Sumer stopped being places of worship in any narrow sense and started becoming something closer to economic empires. They owned farmland, they owned livestock, they ran workshops, fishing fleets, granaries. Farmers delivered grain to the temple as tax, as offering, as obligation. The temple turned around and redistributed grain, beer, wool, and raw materials to laborers, craftsmen, and officials, often as standardized rations instead of anything resembling wages. Priests ran administrative staffs that tracked every bit of it with meticulous accounts. In effect, the temples were functioning as banks and warehouses centuries before either word existed. And because they controlled that much wealth, temple administrators became some of the most powerful economic players in the entire region, arguably managing more day-to-day commerce than the kings whose names actually survive in the history books. Their bookkeeping needs kept getting more sophisticated. Grain rations and clay tokens could only stretch so far. Something had to give.
What do you use to measure value when the thing you're valuing keeps changing? A cow one week, a sack of grain the next, a jar of oil after that. What's the one substance stable enough, portable enough, universally wanted enough to become the yardstick for everything else? By around 3000 BC, the answer had already quietly settled itself: silver. Not because people were suddenly using coins, they weren't, not for another 2,500 years, but because prices increasingly got expressed in silver weight, even when the actual payment was grain or livestock or labor. A contract might specify a debt in silver terms and still get settled with a cow. Silver became the language everyone used to talk about value, even when silver itself never touched their hands. It had real advantages: durable, portable, relatively scarce. But it circulated as raw bullion, bars, rings, irregular chunks hacked off a larger piece, never as anything standardized enough to just hand over before checking it first. Every transaction meant weighing the metal and ideally testing its purity too, which meant markets ran on scales and on officials everyone trusted enough to use those scales honestly. Silver had become money in every functional sense, roughly 2,500 years before anyone struck a single coin. It just came with one enormous catch: you needed a scale for every purchase, every single time, forever. And that's exactly the moment the shekel walks into the story, as something almost nobody today associates it with: a unit of weight, not a coin at all. One Mesopotamian shekel worked out to roughly 8 to 8.5 grams of silver, though the exact standard drifted a bit across different cities and different eras. Governments, temples, merchants used it to price goods, calculate taxes, settle debts. Later, Babylonian law codes wrote payments in shekels routinely. But because no two silver pieces were ever perfectly identical, every transaction meant weighing metal on a scale, shekel or no shekel. What the shekel actually gave people was a shared vocabulary for value, a word everyone across different cities and different kingdoms could use and roughly mean the same thing by. One of history's most recognizable monetary names started life as a measurement, not money at all. Egypt was solving the identical problem, on the opposite side of a desert with its own unit, the deben, in use from around 2600 BC. Same idea: a weight, not a coin. Copper especially, though gold and silver got priced on the same scale. Egyptian workers were typically paid in grain, beer, clothing, oil. State accountants converted all of it into deben values on the books. Tomb paintings actually show officials weighing precious metal on balance scales, a scene repeated across Egyptian administration for tax collection and for managing royal construction projects. Even the civilization that built the pyramids ran an economy with real prices and zero coins. Two empires, two systems, same unsolved problems sitting underneath both of them. Fast forward to roughly 2000 to 1200 BC across the wider Near East and the Eastern Mediterranean, and the workaround gets rougher, more improvised, more desperate, honestly. Hacksilver. Instead of standardized bars, people traded fragments, broken pieces of silver jewelry, chunks of ingots, scrap metal cut down to whatever weight a transaction happened to require. Archaeologists have pulled hacksilver hoards out of the ground across Canaan, Syria, Anatolia, Mesopotamia, and every single fragment inside every single hoard needed weighing before it could change hands. A merchant clips a small piece off a bracelet right there in the middle of a crowded market to make exact change for a stranger. That's not a rare event in some marginal backwater. That's ordinary commerce for over 800 years across an enormous stretch of the ancient world. It proves something important. Precious metal was already functioning as a real medium of exchange centuries before anyone struck a coin. It just wasn't standardized, which meant every transaction was slower than it needed to be, and every single transaction was a small, quiet opportunity for fraud. And fraud doesn't stay small, not when there's silver on the table and no reliable way to check what's real. From roughly 1800 to 700 BC, the whole weighed bullion system groans under its own weight. Every payment needs accurate scales, agreed-upon weights, someone everyone trusts enough to referee the transaction. And dishonest traders have options. Shave a sliver off a silver piece here. Quietly swap in a weight that's just slightly wrong there. Purity is its own separate nightmare. You can't always tell good silver from adulterated silver just by looking at it, so merchants resort to cutting it open, testing it, inspecting it. Anything to be sure they're not about to get robbed in black daylight. Governments try to fix this with standardized official weights. Fraud keeps happening anyway. The hardest part of ancient commerce was never finding silver. Silver was everywhere. The hard part was proving that any specific piece of it was actually what it claimed to be. Right up until geography hands one particular region an accident nobody had planned for. Western Anatolia, specifically the region around Lydia. Rich natural deposits of electrum, a gold and silver alloy that occurs naturally, washed down out of the mountains in rivers like the Pactolus. Electrum was valuable simply because it contained real precious metal, and it got collected and traded widely across the region. But it had one built-in flaw, and it's the same flaw that's been haunting this entire story since the beginning. Its gold-to-silver ratio varies naturally from sample to sample. Nobody can look at a piece of electrum and know its exact value just by looking at it. Merchants have to assay it, estimate the purity before they'll accept it in a trade. Even carrying that inconvenience, electrum still became a major commercial metal across the region. Nature had, essentially by accident, produced the raw material for the first coins in the world, centuries before anyone had the faintest idea what a coin would even be.
By around 700 to 650 BC, Lydia had turned that geological accident into real power. The kingdom sat in exactly the right spot, crossroads between the Greek world on one side and the wealthy established civilizations of the Near East on the other. Its capital, Sardis, grew into a genuine commercial hub, packed with merchants from cultures that rarely cross paths anywhere else on Earth. Lydia's rulers were sitting on wealth from agriculture, mining, trade, and they needed better ways to collect taxes, pay officials, keep commerce moving at the speed their kingdom demanded. Electrum was abundant, skilled metalworkers were available, markets were thriving. Every single ingredient for a monetary breakthrough was already sitting inside the same kingdom waiting for the right king to put the pieces together. And where this actually happens, not the largest empire of the age, not Egypt, not Assyria, a mid-sized kingdom wedged between two much bigger worlds forced by its own geography to solve a trade problem nobody else was even trying to solve yet. So how did humanity go 6,000 years without a single coin, grinding through gift economies, clay tokens, temple ledgers, shekels, debins, hacksilver, endless fraud? And what finally broke the cycle? It came down to one hammer strike. Sometime between roughly 650 and 600 BC, that metalworker in Sardis and others like him produced what most historians now recognize as the first true coins in human history. Small pieces of electrum, struck to a standard weight, stamped with official symbols, often that royal lion. The stamp does something no Hacksilver fragment, no weighed bar ever manage on its own. It guarantees the coin's weight and its authenticity in a single glance. No scale required, no cutting a sample off to test the purity. Just a lion, pressed into metal, and everyone in the market instantly knows what they're holding. Nobody's entirely sure whether these first coins started out paying soldiers, settling state accounts, or moving only through elite transactions at first. What's certain is how fast the idea spread the moment it existed at all. Greek cities in nearby Ionia picked it up almost immediately and started refining it further. Within a few generations, coinage had crossed the Mediterranean and started reshaping trade, taxation, and military finance wherever it landed. One idea, a government stamping its own guarantee onto a piece of precious metal, was about to run for the next 26 centuries. It's still running right now, in your pocket, in your bank app, in the number sitting on a screen somewhere with your name attached to it. But that lion-stamped disc wasn't the end of the problem. It was only the end of the first one. After coinage appears in Lydia, it doesn't leap straight into everyone's daily life overnight. It spreads gradually from limited state use into ordinary commerce over roughly the next 40 to 50 years, somewhere between 600 and 560 BC. These early coins come in a whole range of standardized weights, from big staters all the way down to tiny fractions weighing less than a gram. And because the royal stamp guarantees the weight, merchants stop needing a scale for every single transaction. That alone is a massive shift in the speed of doing business, a shift that ripples out through every market Lydian coinage touches. But electrum still carries its original flaw forward, unchanged, into this brand new technology. Its gold and silver content still varies naturally, so nobody can look at a coin and know its exact intrinsic value, the way they could with a piece of pure metal. That uncertainty means people sometimes discount electrum coins outright, or simply prefer coins minted by an issuer they already trust over one they don't. Even carrying that limitation, the new system is dramatically faster than Hacksilver ever was, and markets around Sardis keep absorbing more and more of it. Word travels fast when something makes trade this much easier. Neighboring states are watching closely and taking notes. The first coins solved the weight problem. They hadn't solved the purity problem. Not yet. Which raises the obvious follow-up. What do you do when the metal itself is the thing you can't trust? That fix arrives with a king whose name would eventually outlive his entire kingdom, Croesus. Ruling from around 570 to 546 BC, Croesus looks at electrum's built-in unreliability and reaches a conclusion that sounds almost too simple in hindsight. The answer isn't a better stamp, it's better metal. Lydian refiners under his rule mastered the metallurgy needed to actually separate electrum into nearly pure gold and nearly pure silver, two clean, distinct metals instead of one unpredictable alloy. Croesus uses that breakthrough to establish one of history's first large-scale systems of separate gold and silver coinage. The resulting coins, Croesus, carry fixed denominations and predictable metal content, which means for the very first time in 6,000 years of monetary improvisation, a person can trust both a coin's weight and its purity from the stamp alone. No assaying, no estimating, no cutting a piece off to check. Croesus issues multiple denominations, which makes both large transactions and small everyday purchases equally practical, and in doing so, he effectively creates the world's first true bimetallic currency system. Coins bearing his mark earn respect across the entire Eastern Mediterranean and become the template every civilization after him studies and copies. Croesus didn't invent coins. He's the reason coins actually worked. And Croesus becomes something else too, not just a monetary reformer, but a legend in real time while he's still alive to hear people talk about him. Between roughly 560 and 546 BC, his fortune, built on Lydia's gold, its trade routes, its taxation, grows into something ancient historians simply can't stop describing. His court pulled in philosophers, artists, statesmen from across the entire Greek world. One story, written down later by Herodotus, has the Athenian lawgiver Solon standing in front of all that wealth and warning Croesus not to judge a man's happiness by his riches alone. Whether that exact exchange happened the way Herodotus tells it is still debated by historians today. The reputation stuck regardless. Even now, in language after language, people still say someone is as rich as Croesus. The man who perfected money, who solved its oldest, thorniest problem, the one that had gone unsolved for 6,000 years, ends up losing both his kingdom and his fortune before his own life is over.
He loses it to Cyrus the Great, king of a Persian empire on the rise, who conquers Lydia around 546 BC. This is exactly where you'd expect the story to end. A defeated kingdom, its innovations buried right alongside it, forgotten within a generation or two. Nobody outside academia remembers. But that's not what happens. So what does a conquering empire do with a defeated kingdom's greatest invention? Cyrus recognizes exactly how useful Lydian coinage is, and instead of dismantling it, tearing down the mints, erasing the lion stamp and starting over with Persian symbols alone, the empire keeps it running almost exactly as it was. Sardis stays an active mint under Persian control. Many Lydian financial institutions carry on largely intact, folded into the machinery of the empire that just crushed their original kingdom. Coinage now has access to one of the largest empires the ancient world has ever seen, stretching Lydian monetary technology outward toward Anatolia, and eventually toward Central Asia. One kingdom invented coinage. The empire that crushed it made absolutely sure the invention didn't die along with its kingdom. Meanwhile, the Greek city-states aren't waiting around for permission from anybody. Between roughly 560 and 500 BC, cities across Ionia and the wider Aegean, Miletus, Ephesus, Phocia, Aegean, start minting coins of their own, and each city reaches for its own symbol instead of simply copying Lydia's lion. Sea turtles, owls, goats, mythical creatures pulled straight out of local legend. A coin's image becomes a small act of civic identity, a way for a city to announce itself to every single merchant who touches that piece of metal, whether that merchant can read the local language or not. You can identify exactly where a coin came from just by glancing at the design stamped into it, and competition between rival cities keeps pushing minting quality steadily upward, year after year. Within a few decades, coinage isn't just a Lydian curiosity that happened to survive a war. It's a defining feature of how Greek commerce actually works, city by city, market by market. Long before flags became the symbol of a nation, a stamped coin was already doing that exact job. But something quieter, and arguably far more important, is happening underneath all this regional competition. What does a coin actually mean once every city has its own version of one? Somewhere around 550 BC, governments start to understand a coin isn't just a chunk of valuable metal anymore. The official stamp on it is a public guarantee, backed by political authority, not merely by the weight of the gold sitting inside it. Which means counterfeiting or clipping a coin isn't just cheating the merchant sitting across a table from you, it's undermining the state's own credibility in front of every trading partner that state has. Governments respond by tightening their grip on minting, standardized dies, official weights, regulated production, harsher penalties for anyone caught cutting corners. Money has quietly turned from a commodity into an institution, resting partly on trust in the state that issued it, not just trust in the metal itself. That idea, a promise stamped on metal, later stamped on paper, later still typed as numbers on a screen, is the exact concept every modern currency on Earth still runs on, right now, today, in whatever's sitting in your wallet or your banking app. And once trust becomes the actual product, two things show up almost immediately, on schedule, like clockwork: war and crime.
Coinage changes more than markets. Between roughly 530 and 500 BC, it changes how wars get fought. Before coins, paying soldiers means handing out food, livestock, or weighed silver. Heavy, inconsistent, painfully slow to move at the speed an army actually needs to move. Standardized coins fix that almost overnight. A government can issue predictable wages that soldiers can actually spend wherever a market happens to exist along the campaign route. That predictability makes armies dramatically easier to recruit, and it creates a new category of soldier, the mercenary. Someone who fights for pay rather than loyalty, and who depends completely on that pay being portable and trustworthy wherever the fighting takes them. Campaigns start stimulating local economies just by soldiers spending their wages in the towns they pass through on the way to battle. From this point forward, war and money stay tangled together for the rest of recorded history. They never fully separate again. And wherever real value starts circulating at that kind of scale, one profession shows up almost as fast as the soldiers do. Between roughly 525 and 510 BC, counterfeiters are already producing plated coins, cheap metal cores dressed up in a thin layer of gold or silver, convincing enough to pass a quick glance in a crowded market. Other operators are shaving tiny slivers off genuine coins, one at a time, a theft so small per coin it stays almost invisible while it quietly accumulates into real money over hundreds of transactions. Governments answer with harsh punishments and steadily better minting technique, sharper dies, tighter quality control, more careful inspection at every stage. Archaeologists have actually pulled the counterfeit coins themselves out of the ground, physical proof that financial crime evolved in lockstep with official money, practically from day one it existed. If there's a second oldest profession running quietly through this entire 6,000-year story, it might genuinely be counterfeiting. The Persian Empire, having inherited Lydia's invention, takes it further still and turns it into something no kingdom before it had ever attempted. Around 520 BC, Darius I overhauls the entire imperial monetary system. He introduces the gold daric alongside a silver coin called the sigillus, both standardized across the entire empire, both trusted widely in international trade, from one end of Persian territory to the other. The derrick's design shows the Persian king himself as an archer, a deliberate statement of royal authority stamped directly onto currency that will pass through thousands of hands he'll never personally meet. Persian officials use these coins to pay soldiers, collect tribute, fund administration across territory stretching from Egypt all the way to India. Local currencies keep circulating too, alongside it, but the derrick becomes one of the most respected coins anywhere in the ancient world. The largest empire on Earth hasn't adopted coinage as a luxury item for the elite. It's adopted coinage as infrastructure, as load-bearing as its roads, its granaries, its armies. And while the largest empire on Earth is busy building an imperial monetary machine, one small city is quietly laying groundwork for the single most recognizable coin the ancient world will ever produce. Between roughly 515 and 500 BC, Athens begins minting silver coins showing Athena on one face and her sacred owl on the other, drawing on rich silver deposits at Laurion just outside the city. Athens won't become a true monetary powerhouse until the following century. The real explosion is still ahead of it, but the foundation is already being poured, right here in this narrow window. That owl, simple, instantly recognizable even from a crowded market, starts earning trust from merchants who accept it even outside Greek territory entirely, because its silver content stays reliably, consistently pure, transaction after transaction. More than 25 centuries before any multinational corporation ever built a logo, a small engraved owl had already become one of the most trusted symbols in the entire ancient world. By around 500 BC, every one of these separate threads finally converges into something genuinely new, something that hadn't existed on this planet before this exact moment. An international monetary network. Coinage now stretches across Lydia, Persia, mainland Greece, the Aegean Islands, cities scattered around the entire Eastern Mediterranean. Different governments, different stamps, different metals, and merchants move between all of it. Anyway, trading one currency for another based on weight, purity, and reputation, the exact same way currency traders read exchange rates on a screen today. Markets run faster and more reliably than they ever have at any point in this entire 6,000-year story. Long-distance trade accelerates hard because coins are portable, divisible, durable, and recognizable across borders in a way Hacksilver and grain rations never once managed to be. Governments lean on coinage harder every single year for taxation, for military finance, for public works that would have been unimaginable to run on weighed silver alone. What started as one small kingdom's answer to a local trade problem has, in barely a century, become the financial language of most of the known world. 6,000 years, clay tokens, sealed bullae, temple granary stacked floor to ceiling with grain nobody could move fast enough, shekels and debens that measured everything and settled nothing, cut-up jewelry weighed in a scale in the middle of a crowded, shouting market, one merchant's honesty the only thing standing between a fair trade and a robbery. Every single one of those systems solved something. Every single one of them left something unsolved behind it. And it took a mid-sized kingdom, sitting on a river full of electrum it didn't even know was rare, to finally close the loop. With one small stamped disc that meant a merchant never had to reach for a scale again. The lion stopped roaring in Sardis a long time ago. The kingdom that stamped it is gone. Croesus is gone, Cyrus is gone. Every hand that ever touched that first electrum coin is gone over 2,600 years. The idea never stopped. It moved into Persia. It moved into Athens, riding on the back of a small stone owl. It moved into Rome, into medieval Europe, into paper, into ledgers, into the exact banking app sitting on your phone right now. Every single version of it built on the same one-sentence promise that metalworker made without even realizing he was making it. Trust this stamp, and you never have to weigh the metal yourself again. Somewhere, right now, someone is looking at a number on a screen and trusting it completely, without a second thought, without ever once asking what's actually backing it up. That trust has a starting point. It has a birthday. It has an address.
A small, hot workshop in Sardis, sometime around 650 BC, with a lion still cooling on the bench. The lion's still roaring. You've just stopped noticing.